Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Material Mix, the podcast from Holcim that explores the future of materials, innovation and sustainable construction across the UK. I'm your host, Hannah McInnes, and I am thrilled to kick off with a subject that sits right at the heart of the industry's climate challenge. Today's episode is called Mind the Carbon Gap, and it's all about a material we rely on to build almost everything around us, cement. But it's one that also comes with a fairly significant carbon footprint. Cement manufacturing is responsible for roughly 8% of global CO2 emissions, and with the UK committed to reaching net zero by 2050, the pressure is on to rethink how we make and how we use this essential material. So across this episode, we're going to unpack the innovations, the policy shifts, and the industry-wide collaborations shaping the next generation of low-carbon cement. We'll also take a look at some of the solutions already underway, including Holcim's own upcoming carbon capture project. So I can't think of three better placed guests, our absolute expert guides across this subject. I'm delighted to welcome you three. Leon Black is a Professor of Infrastructure Materials at the University of Leeds and Director of the Centre for Infrastructure Materials. Welcome, Leon.
Hello there.
Diana Casey is the Executive Director for Energy and Climate Change at Mineral Products Association and also Board Director at the Emissions Trading Group. Welcome. And Tom Redfern, last but absolutely not least, Head of Sustainability at Holcim. I'm going to start off. One of the things I think we often do in these discussions is use words that have been used for a long time that have slightly lost the meaning. People have forgotten what they are. Everybody knows decarbonisation, of course they do, but I think we use them so liberally that we forget exactly what's going on with a word and why it's so important. So Tom, I'm going to start with you. Just define this idea of decarbonisation and why it's so important, particularly now, so critical.
Yes, thanks, Hannah. So I think to start off with, we've really got to think about what are the impacts if we don't decarbonise. And we're seeing an ever-changing climate. We're seeing increased droughts, but also increased flooding. That impacts us here in the UK, and we have to respond and adapt and put the right plans in place to reduce that. But it also has a disproportionate impact on countries in often more uneconomically developed areas. So it's our duty, really, to do the right thing, to start to decarbonise, to continue the path we've already started, to both protect future generations here in the UK, but also globally.
And, I mean, on this mission to decarbonise, how do you think we're doing generally? It's a big question.
It's a big question, and I think it's easy to be negative because, of course, we can always do more and we can always do faster. But we're already seeing great progress with decoupling emissions from electricity generation. We've got real plans in place in heavy industry sectors like cement to make meaningful and net zero impacts by 2050. So there's more to do, but we're definitely starting that journey and making good progress.
So I mentioned in the introduction some of those figures or statistics that show why it's so essential that we turn to construction and to cement in this very critical decarbonisation process. But can you just explain more broadly why we really need to engage this sector, this industry, cement really needs to engage?
Sure. So we use huge quantities of cement and concrete each year. It's equivalent to about a cubic metre of concrete per person per year. But equally, we can't imagine modern society without cement and concrete. It underpins our infrastructure, it underpins modern life as we know it. Also, as we move towards a more low carbon and low energy society, cement and concrete plays a vital role there. For example, each offshore wind turbine will contain about 1,000 tonnes of concrete within the foundations. This infrastructure doesn't float in midair. It's an essential part of a low-energy transition.
Could you just explain what it is about cement and what it is that is so detrimental, why it is so important that we address?
Sure. So every tonne of Portland cement is responsible for about 840 kilos of CO2 being released directly released into the atmosphere. This, coupled with 4 billion tonnes of Portland cement production, means that we have this figure of about 8% of global CO2 emissions associated with cement and concrete.
And I just turn to you, Diana. Do you think that the industry as a whole is galvanised, is reacting to this need and ready to step up?
Yeah, so in the UK, all the cement producers are really committed to achieving net zero. It is a very hard to abate sector. Part of the process of cement, there's essentially two ways that carbon dioxide is produced. The process uses very high temperatures. You need volcanic temperatures to heat the raw materials, and that requires a lot of fuel. So you have emissions produced there. But the raw materials, when they're heated to those temperatures, they also emit carbon dioxide, and those emissions are very, very difficult to reduce. And that's where carbon capture, which I think we're going to talk about later, is so important. But as a sector, we've got a roadmap. We know how we can reduce those emissions, and all of the producers in the UK are committed to doing that.
And I'm really interested in, so they are galvanised and they are committed. What is driving that commitment and that desire? Because I suppose it can't all be ideology. I'd love to think it was ideology and everyone wanted to live in a greener world, but is it being driven by demand? Is it from customers? Is it governmentally driven?
Yeah, of course. And firstly, I think just building on Diana's point, it's amazing that as a heavy industry, we actually have a route and we have a clear plan and we know it's deliverable.
Yeah.
But of course, there's many drivers why we must do this. Firstly, our stakeholders, our customers, they expect us as an industry to be responsible and start to decarbonise our cement and our emissions. And we've already got a really good track history of doing that. We've made significant reductions since 1990, further reductions again since 2018. So we're on that path, but we now need to go bigger, better and bolder. And it's really getting towards the bit that Di talked about then around those emissions which come from a process. We can decarbonise our fuels, but when we're actually going through that chemical process, then we will always have some carbon emissions. It's those that we need to capture. And I think kind of going back to your point about what's driving this, so of course our customers, but also regulatory changes. As a country, we're committed to net zero by 2050. And with that comes a whole raft of regulation to help drive industry in that direction. So we need to keep up with that and make sure that we deliver in line with the country's expectations.
And we is obviously the industry, but you can't assume do it alone. Is it being backed broadly? Do you think governments are behind this?
Yeah, well, government is a key driver of decarbonisation, as Tom mentioned, and there's a number of policies trying to help us get there, things like emissions trading, for example. That has the challenge of piling on cost, which is a key driver of reducing emissions, but it also has the impact that it can affect the competitiveness of our domestic sector.
Yeah.
So one way we could meet UK targets is by shutting down our industry and sending it overseas, which globally isn't a very clever thing to do when we talk about decarbonisation. So alongside those kind of the stick approach, as I call it, and piling on the cost, the government needs to help provide the support to those industries to decarbonise. And we are starting to see some of that. In carbon capture, for example, they have announced kind of billions of funding to help those industries decarbonise. It's focused in two kind of clusters mostly at the moment. So there's a bit of a geographical lottery. If you're in the right place, you can get the funding. So there's more that needs to be done. But I think government are starting to recognise that if we are going to go as fast as we need to meet the targets they've set in legislation, they need to have the financial support there to help sectors do it and remain competitive while they do so.
What do you think about this speed, this as fast as we need to? Is it realistic, the aims that have been set out?
I think achieving net zero by 2050, I think across the whole of society, is going to be a challenge. But that shouldn't be a challenge that we shirk away from. We should still embrace the opportunity to decarbonise, because any reduction in carbon emissions is going to be an improvement.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have beautifully set the scene, but there's lots to discuss. You've obviously brought up carbon capture, which we will come back to. But one of the actually sort of fascinating and really important things to discuss is the material itself. And we've established we need cement, as I understand it, we need cement. So we can't entirely have something made up of completely different components. But I mean, Leon, I come to you for this. We're looking at new materials, different ways of making up cement that's more environmentally friendly and more sustainable.
Yes, if we look at the Earth's composition, there's a limited number of elements, chemical elements, that we can use to produce whatever binder we're going to use. It just happens Portland cement meets those requirements very well. But any alternative is going to be constrained by what is available at significant quantities. We could produce a wonderful low-carbon cement, but if you can only produce 1,000 tonnes per year, it's of no use to anybody. We need to be producing at very large scale. And there are a whole host of possible alternatives. I don't believe there's any single alternative is going to decarbonise entirely. There was a fantastic study by Death by 1,000 Cuts, and every single person within the industry, and extend that not just cement producers, but anybody using concrete, the whole construction industry, society in general, if everybody can do a little bit, collectively it can make a significant benefit.
And you said there are a whole raft of options. Which are particularly exciting and promising to you?
I'm going to be somewhat biased here because these are projects that I'm aware of because I'm working on them, but a lot of work around developing calcined clays. So we can take excavation spoil, or materials that would otherwise be wastes within a construction process. We can heat these clays to 700, 800 degrees centigrade, and that will then replace anything about a third of the cement within concrete. That brings about a significant reduction in carbon footprint. There's a lot of work looking then at taking construction and demolition waste. How do we move from a linear to a circular economy, and recycling the fines that come from processing construction waste, either feeding this material back into a cement kiln or developing cementitious materials from these fine concrete powders.
You mentioned calcined clay. How are you using that? What are the challenges, and how does that work from a supplier point of view?
So, firstly, we're really fortunate as Holcim UK to be part of the global Holcim group. So, I think probably building on the point of using clinker substitutes, probably what I didn't appreciate before I joined the cement industry was this is actually quite a complex chemical process, and it's very specific what you need to get at the end. So the simplicity of the idea that you could replace some of the clinker with calcined clay, there's a huge amount of work that goes into that. So Holcim out in Lyon have quite literally a university standard facility with professors and scientists developing these new materials, and calcined clay is absolutely a core part of where we see the future going. We already have some plants producing calcined clay in Europe, and we're starting to look at how we can integrate that into the UK market. As Leon also said, Portland cement, or CEM 1, has historically been a traditional safe option, and people know and trust that material. And when we're starting to introduce new blends and new mixes, it takes a lot of time to build customer confidence up and get regulatory standard changes to allow that to happen and be used at scale. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is we're doing a lot of work at kind of the front end in Holcim and investing huge amounts of money. It's not just about the money, but this research is phenomenally expensive. But we also need to start to see the regulatory shifts and behaviour shifts of consumers at the end start to ask us and want to see these materials.
I mean, really interesting to come to you, Diana, for that. Both things. So are we seeing the regulatory shifts happen fast enough?
So this is a challenging area, and MPA actually has brought the sector together, particularly on the calcined clay, to try and move the standards forward. So we did a big project doing all the testing required to get those cements into the UK standard, which is called BS 8500. So as a sector, we're taking the lead on trying to hurry some of those regulations along. We've also had agreement from the sort of standards making body that standard, rather than being updated every 5 years, it will be updated every 2 years. So there are things happening to help speed that along and make sure these new and innovative products are getting into the marketplace.
And what about the second thing Tom was referencing, all important consumer confidence? Is there indication that customers are confident with using something new?
So getting those materials, doing that extensive program of testing and getting them in the standard is a key way to build confidence. If it's in the standard, that kind of work has been done. They know how they can use it in what applications. So that all helps. We're really seeing a drive from the consumers themselves. They want to try these newer products. The lower carbon products. So it's matching that demand with the producers is really important, but we're definitely seeing interest. It's whether people like insurers are happy, and Leon might know a bit more.
I was going to say, Leon, your reflections back on that's really fascinating. What you sort of the indications you get about customer confidence and insurance.
Yes, the construction industry is inherently conservative, and rightly so. You're dealing with consequence of failure can be catastrophic. But we are seeing some companies starting to lead on the drive to decarbonisation and willing to take. It's not taking a risk, because that puts too negative a connotation on it. It's trying something new and willing to break from the orthodoxy if they have confidence in the materials. There are some good developments around standards, so Flex 350, moving away from having a standard that is based on what goes into your concrete, moving towards actually a standard or guidelines that how your concrete performs, which is what we want. We want our concrete to perform well and be decarbonised. It doesn't matter too much precisely what is there, provided it performs, it does the function we want it to.
Yeah, really interesting. And you referred earlier when we were talking about materials also to moving towards making it more of a circular economy where construction was concerned, because we can't just change the materials. I mean, as you referred to, it is classically a hard to abate emission, along with aviation and other industries. Tom, perhaps you can just explain what more needs to be done, because if it was just changing the components, then we'd probably be moving there much faster. But there's a lot more that you're looking at here.
There's a lot more, and I think you touched on circularity, which is an area I'm really passionate about. And I think actually what we also need to recognise is that we place quite low value on concrete and cement, much like kind of fresh water. We take that for granted and we see it as abundant, when in actual fact we need to change our whole mindset and way we think about that. So we need to see it as a valued resource, which it is, and we need to look to firstly minimise its loss or minimise its consumption, then also look at how we can reuse that back in a circular economy, back into our processes. There's often a trade-off here, and I think we need to be kind of aware of that and kind of be upfront to say that sometimes a circular solution isn't always a low carbon solution, and that's often something that's quite difficult to kind of marry up, especially when you start to add in transport and crushing and screening. But we can balance those things. We've got to do the right thing in the right places and start to move concrete back up the value chain when we reuse it.
It's really interesting you say sort of not seen as a valued resource. I mean, that's a big mindset shift, perhaps, for consumers, for people out there like me who aren't working in this industry, to sort of respect, I suppose, and think about it more. I don't know how you make an effort to do that.
I think we're starting to see it come in now. There's a lot more focus on regenerative design. So rather than demolishing a building after 30, 40 years, we're looking at how can we reuse that building? What can we do using that existing structure, which might still require a bit more concrete, but far less than demolishing the whole thing and starting again. So we're starting to see that come through. We're starting to see that come through in designs and way structural engineers are thinking, and architects. But I'd say we're also very early on that journey.
But in terms of those other things then, circularity and looking at new fuels, I mean, Danny, your reflections on that, and again, this question of whether it's happening fast enough, being supported enough, whether you have hope in this as a pathway towards decarbonising.
Yeah, I think part of the sector's journey, the decarbonisation journey it's taken, has been around things like fuel switching and using waste-derived fuels. Across the sector, there's kind of 14 different fuels that are used, and that includes things like waste tyres, refuse-derived fuel, and a few others, including waste wood, but it tends to be waste wood from construction and demolition, not kind of forestry waste. So the sector's done a lot in this area, and there are some plants using kind of 90% of their thermal energies from waste. And of course, it also has a benefit that we're not just using the energy from those fuels, we're actually recycling the mineral content into the cement as well, which comes back to that circular principle. And it's replacing some of the virgin raw materials. So we've got a great story to tell on fuel switching. And I think there's still more that we can do. For example, we were using some 100% waste biomass fuels, which unfortunately have been diverted out of the sector due to the government subsidy. So the government subsidy was aimed at kind of increasing their use. But what they've actually done is just shifted it around and not necessarily got value for money for that incentive. So as a sector, we'd love to be able to access those fuels on a level playing field, and we'd maybe see that increase our decarbonisation.
I mean, should they be able to access those?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know. In terms of the fuel switching is certainly not my field.
Okay,
So I don't know. If I can go back to the circularity
Yes, please.
point, I think this highlights the need to bring in all stakeholders within construction. Quite often, and one of the huge benefits of concrete can be its longevity. We have a tendency to demolish a building when we could just strip it back to its central core, where the reinforced concrete core will be perfectly sound, perfectly capable of being reused, and just put a new facade onto a building. But instead we're demolishing structures really for aesthetic reasons and for changes in taste. And that is an incredible, incredible waste. We can do an awful lot better, but it needs all stakeholders to come together to work out how to maintain value in the system.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Because again, it's that massive mindset shift that needs to go alongside that, as you say, in terms of aesthetics and the things that people have come to believe just happens, just rely on the fact that something's replaced. So you need to have that mindset shift, but also the stakeholders. I mean, who needs to get involved to make it happen?
Almost everybody along the supply chain, from the material producers, the designers, demolition contractors, the building contractors, through to planning and regulatory guidelines. It just involves more communication and spending a little bit of time thinking about how we can do things differently, rather than repeating designs that we've used in the past because we are comfortable with them. Yeah. We have to take ourselves out of our comfort zones a little bit, and almost start from scratch with each project. But that takes time.
I mean, I want to talk a bit more about collaboration, but can I go back to something central to the discussion that we've mentioned a bit, kind of moved into and moved out of, but obviously in terms of carbon capture. I mean, you're someone who's having these conversations all the time. Can you again do what I asked you to do at the beginning? Not assume that everybody listening knows exactly what's going on. What is it?
So as I kind of said, I think earlier in the conversation, so probably 50% plus of emissions, about 50% plus of emissions from the cement making process actually comes from the chemical reaction that takes place when you put those raw materials into the kiln. So your shale and your limestone, they will naturally release carbon. That's part of the process, and that's what makes clinker at the end. So even if we were in a world where we had 100% renewable energy firing the kiln, that in itself is very difficult, but probably achievable. There will always be these residual circa 50+% emissions coming from a process. Unless we can change chemistry, we can't do anything about that, and we're pretty sure we can't change the chemistry. So we need to look at how we can capture those emissions. So for us at Holcim UK, we have a project that we've already started to progress, which looks at creating a pipeline, which will see a carbon capture plant built at our cement plant, and that would then transport the carbon up to the northwest and into some old gas reserves beneath the sea. Sounds quite futuristic, but we're already seeing this happening. There's a carbon capture plant that's now recently become operational, a cement plant in Brevik, so we know this can be done. And we also see this as a shared responsibility across the industry. So us as Holcim UK aren't doing this alone. We're working with some of our competitors in the industry to form a coalition to help make this scalable and actually achievable in reality.
So I think for me, the easiest way to explain carbon capture is that if you imagine the exhaust of a car, you're almost putting something over the exhaust, sucking all that CO2 out so it doesn't go anywhere near the atmosphere, and then storing it. And that's what we're aiming to do with the cement plants in the UK. Now, the peat cluster that Tom was talking about is a really important project. It's the world's largest cement and lime carbon capture project right here in the UK. And a great example of collaboration. You've got these competitors that are coming together and working. Like a few years ago, you would never see this. They're competitors. But this is how important decarbonisation is to the sector, and doing it here in the UK where it can support local jobs and the local economies is just a brilliant project.
I mean, when I was researching this before talking to you all and then hearing the way you talk about it now, it just sounds too good to be true in terms of how easy and brilliant it sounds. So what are the step-ups? What are the challenges?
Oh, well, I think the challenges are the cost of building this pipeline to go from the Derbyshire and Staffordshire area in the middle of the country out to Morecambe Bay to store the CO2. That's going to affect quite a few people on the way. But the benefit we're stopping 3 million tonnes of CO2 going into the atmosphere every year. The other challenge is that's the pipeline. The whole project and the value for money in the project is based on all of those competitors moving together to build capture plants on each of their sites at the same time, and then be delivering the CO2 into the pipeline. And of course, for the storage site at the end to also have all its consenting and be able to take the CO2. That's quite a lot of moving parts to get all together. Now, one of the other challenges the project faces is the pipeline's been given a National Wealth Fund equity investment, and the producers themselves, the cement producers and the lime producers, have put millions of pounds into developing that pipeline, doing the engineering study. But there's no funding available currently for the sites themselves to do the capture plant, the same engineering design of the capture plant on their site. And that's a real challenge, because without that, you've got a pipeline with nothing to transport and nowhere for it to go. So, it's really important that we get a bit more support from government to get the whole value chain of that project going.
What support? What would that look like?
So I think initially it's a bit of support to actually do that engineering study. So we're talking kind of grant funding. And then once you've got your carbon capture project up and running, there is a business model, it's called, that government have developed to provide ongoing support so that the cement produced, the net zero cement produced from these projects, can compete with other cement, because these plants are expensive to run. They do use a lot of power, for example, and we all know electricity prices are very high. So this government funding just helps ensure that the cement producer can compete. And at the moment, there's no guarantee that support's going to be available. So I think the producers themselves, like Holcim, need some confidence and visibility that support's going to be there when they've got their projects in place.
You're nodding vigorously, Tom.
I'd say firstly, Di, your analogy for car exhaust for carbon capture is far better than my attempt, so I will use that going forwards. But yeah, we absolutely need to do this as a coalition, as industry. And I think we have already started to put our money where our mouth is. We've invested millions of pounds as industry into the Peat Cluster Coalition, which is starting the pipeline. And we've already invested significant amounts of money in starting to develop our carbon capture projects. But we're all businesses and these things cost a lot of money. So we do need that certainty from government to kind of give us the confidence to keep progressing at pace. He said it sounds too good to be true. It almost does sound too good to be true, but it's happened and we've seen it happen. And the technology is coming on at such a rapid pace. We're confident that there could be 2 or 3 different technology options available for us by the time we come to build the plant in kind of late this decade.
I mean, I should say, actually, sort of researching this conversation was a very hopeful exercise. I was surprised again by how many extraordinary options there are and how far we are still a way to go in going down those roads. I mean, Leon, the carbon capture that we're discussing in terms of this kind of toolkit of solutions that we've already looked at, where do you think it fits into it?
I think it's one of a multitude of options available to us. Whilst cement production is a hard-to-abate sector, the fact that you have point source emissions is incredibly valuable. I think the analogy you made, Diana, is fantastic with a car. I don't want to say no, but cars move around, and so capturing CO2 from each individual car becomes very difficult. With a cement plant, you have a single point source of CO2 that you can capture that CO2 as it is released. But we shouldn't rely on carbon capture and storage alone. We can look along, again, all of the stakeholders come together to each make their own little contribution. We can reduce the amount of cement in a concrete mix. We can design structures such that they are designed for optimum longevity. Lots and lots of different actions we can all make that collectively make a significant change.
I mean, let's kind of dwell on this collectively thing, I think, because it's obviously so important, the collaborative aspect. And one, we've talked about governments, and we've obviously talked about it from your perspective and from an academic perspective. But what about startups? They must be hugely important. I know that you Tom, you're collaborating quite a lot with startups in many different ways. I mean, how essential is that?
Startups are vital to this process, and there's many kind of doctorates in universities who are doing amazing things, got incredible ideas, and we need to identify the best ones to work with and help scale those up. So we do that on a UK level, but also I kind of mentioned about our innovation centre out in Lyon. We're constantly looking for new people to work with, and then there's another programme called Holcim Maker, and that's a specific arm within Holcim Global that identifies these startups to help identify and push forwards new technologies and new thinking.
I mean, what's your reflection, Diana, on the importance of startups and how supported they're being in this?
Yeah, I think I agree with Tom, to be honest. They are important, that there's so many people looking at these things from all different aspects and different technology providers. I get contacted quite regularly about carbon capture technologies, about new additions for cement to try and reduce the CO2. And it's really important, I think, as a trade association, we quite often try and link those startups when they contact us with the producers, because they're the ones who can really work with them and, help those technologies. I think there is a challenge where there's a lot of sort of innovation, and then it's sort of, there's this valley of death, I think they call it, in the middle, where actually trying to deploy them is quite tricky. I think it falls down a government funding gap a little bit as well. And I think that's where companies like Holcim and others can kind of help overcome some of that gap. I don't know if you agree. But...
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And that's kind of where we have that benefit of that kind of global reach and that kind of backing of dedicated teams to help really pick those ones which look like they're going to deliver real value at the end and help them move forwards.
From your perspective, in terms of this great coming together that's so necessary, you've flagged up, how much importance should we place on startups? I'm sure you've come across quite a lot in terms of from an academic point of view.
Yes, again, it comes back to this idea of having multiple different solutions. Startups may bring a very niche approach to something, but it all has a part to play, be it decarbonisation of the cement production, or then an innovation within the concrete production, or then even on-site practice. Yes, a whole host of innovation that has sometimes been lacking in the cement industry historically.
I mean, I suppose the other point in terms of collaborating is also looking in other places of what we can learn from other industries. I mean, Diana, what would you say that perhaps looking out we can learn from the way other places are moving forward?
I think actually it's important to note the UK is quite a leader.
Yeah.
We as the Trade Association, we're members of both Cement Europe and the Global Cement and Concrete Association. So I think as an industry, as a sector, we're very well sort of plugged in globally and at the European level. So that's a really good opportunity to learn from what others are doing, share information, see who's moving quickly and more slowly, and different things are being tried in different parts of the world as well. And we can share that learning and make sure that that we're not duplicating effort. And I think that's quite important. But the UK is a real leader in this area, which I think is really important and a great story to tell.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love your reflections on that, Tom, in terms of comparing and contrasting and also working together.
Yeah, so I suppose in some ways I'm fortunate that prior to my time at Holcim I worked in aviation, so a completely different sector, but with very difficult challenges as well. And I think actually Di made a really good point. When we started talking about peak cluster earlier, we're saying about how this is industry working together, and probably 5-6 years ago this would almost have been unimaginable. And I think that's what aviation does very well. They recognise that decarbonisation is the future of the industry and it's a shared goal, and the only way to do that is as a collective. And I think we're doing that, and we're much better at that, notwithstanding these competitive markets and everything else that we need to be conscious of. And I think doing more of that, this is the only way we're going to solve this, is together and peak clusters.
How it's again back to these sort of mindset, hearts and mind shifts that are almost the most. You can do all of the brilliant things you're talking about, but these are sort of bigger challenges, and they're the really interesting ones. But how do you do that?
I think having a clear narrative and a clear pathway, and the MPA have just published the update to the carbon roadmap, which again reinforces that there is absolutely a path to net zero by 2050, and it isn't just carbon capture, it's a big part of it, but there's all the other things we've been talking about to this point. And then also reinforcing the bits that Leon was talking about at the beginning. So our society, not in the UK but globally, is built really on the foundations of concrete and cement. And we know that whilst in the UK we're quite fortunate, we're well developed, and a lot of our infrastructure will be here for many years to come. Across the world, we think it's probably around another 75% of buildings still to take place by 2050. And that's not just important for us as a cement producer, it's important to society. This is giving people good homes, safe places to live, warm places to live, and all the benefits that come along with this. So I think we need to be much more clear on why concrete is so important. It's sometimes not too exciting to think about a piece of concrete, but actually it delivers so much for the global society that we need to be really clear on that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's like you're doing three different things that shouldn't go together but do perfectly. So you're saying it's certainly not good for the environment in many ways, but in appreciating it more and respecting it more and not taking it for granted, you actually come back to doing something, much better in all sustainable issues. That's the point, really, isn't it? Having a more innate appreciation of these materials and these things makes us respect them more and therefore use them better.
Yes, I would say it's an analogy I use in some of my lectures. If you were to turn up on Dragon's Den with a bag of cement and say, here is a material, it can be made globally, we can manufacture 4 billion tonnes of it, it sits in a bag until you need to use it, and all you have to do is add water. It takes whatever shape, form you need, and it can last for 100 years. The dragons would bite your hand off. Instead, we say, oh, it's a bag of cement. And that, I think, recognising its potential and its value is something we have to do in order to really achieve its full potential.
You should do that. Give it a test. Go on Dragon's Den. See what their faces do. Sorry, yes.
The final point, and again we've kind of touched on this, is the amazing thing about cement and concrete is we produce it locally. We produce that in the UK, often very close to where it's actually in its final use. We create high-skilled jobs in often quite rural communities. This is an essential part of how we operate it in the UK. So a decarbonised, sustainable future for cement production, ultimately concrete production in the UK, is so important.
Well, if we come to that future, I'm going to ask you all to make a bold prediction for 2050. So if you were going to make a prediction for construction in 2050, Leon, I'm looking at you first. What would it be?
I think I hope this is a prediction and not just a wish. Okay. I would like to see more circularity. I would like to see us more communication, looking at how we work collectively to decarbonise and use materials when they are needed, not just because we want to build something new. I think a whole palette of different cementitious binders available to us, and with carbon capture and storage playing a part, but not the sole solution.
So when you say you hope it is a prediction and not a wish, Can you have confidence that it might be a prediction and not a wish?
I think we will make very, very good effort and very strong moves in that direction. There are lots of challenges ahead to really achieve net zero, but just because those challenges are facing us doesn't mean we should shy away from them. If you're about to crash a car, you still apply your brakes. You don't keep going endlessly.
Diana, what about your bold prediction? You can have two if you like.
I don't know if this is a prediction or what I want to see. So for me, it's really important that by 2050, the construction sector is served by domestically produced cement and concrete. I think the sector is facing a competitiveness challenge at the moment while it decarbonises, and there is a real risk that instead of producing this amazing material domestically and having all the benefits of construction and growth in the UK, keeping that here, there is a risk that we could end up importing it, and it might not be low carbon cement that we're importing. So for me, if anything, I would like that domestic supply for UK construction in 2050.
I mean, you've alluded at it, but what makes it a possible and not a hope?
I think it's government taking action to level the playing field with imports. So there's a number of things that are making the domestic sector uncompetitive. High electricity prices are one. The fact that we have to pay a carbon price, but there are many other countries in the world that don't, is another. And there's other things as well, like just the high cost of labour. We're really proud as a sector that we have very highly skilled and well-paid jobs, but it's all the on-costs that the government put on in terms of the national insurance hikes, etc., that mean labour is very expensive here. And it's just another thing on top of quite a large regulatory burden, which is made up of many, many things, that makes it very expensive to produce cement here. And there is this real risk that if government doesn't address some of those things, we're going to see more and more imports coming into the UK. And it's a missed opportunity, really. It's a missed opportunity to grow the sector, the low carbon sector here, and all the amazing jobs in those local areas that it provides.
But these are conversations you're having every day, I think. Most days, perhaps Sundays off. But in those conversations, do you feel that that we are moving towards what you'd like to see? Or
They're in certain areas. I think the government have really recognised the issue with electricity prices, and we're starting to see action there. The challenge is that I'm not sure it's going far enough, and more needs to be done. And alongside that is some of the support for things like carbon capture that we talked about earlier as well.
Tom, your bold prediction for 2050.
Well, we've covered a lot of the points, but I thought...
Sorry to leave you last.
No, not at all. I was thinking about this yesterday, so I thought I'll ask my wife, someone who's got no relation to kind of concrete and cement production. I said, what do you see as the future of cities looking like by 2050? She jokingly said, just flatten and make green spaces. But I kind of sat to reflect on that for a minute, and actually, I think we're clearly not going to flatten cities. They're integral to what we do. But by 2050, I genuinely believe we're in a place where we've got regenerative design, so we're reusing buildings better. We've got low carbon cements, which are produced in the UK, or hopefully net zero cements, which are produced in the UK, supporting those local jobs. And we're also integrating nature into the cities, onto the green spaces point of view. At the moment, we're very good at building concrete blocks, but we could actually do so much to bring nature in through green roofs, facades, sustainable drainage. So I appreciate we're going a little bit off just the carbon topic here, but this is the whole kind of future shift of where I think cities will be in another kind of 25 years' time. They'll be unrecognisable to where we are today.
And actually, I don't need to ask you what shifts it from hope to reality, because I think you sound very much like you believe in that future. You've kind of envisaged it.
I definitely believe it. And that's because we're seeing action happen today. I think perhaps if we'd had this conversation 5-6 years ago, there's still a little bit of technology not existing. Hopes and dreams probably isn't the best word, but that kind of like thinking outside the box. We see this now. We see the carbon capture plants in operation. We see the alternative materials going to cement mixes. We see the calcined clays. We see circular economy happening. We see nature being incorporated into designs with green roofs and facades. So it's happening.
Yeah.
Just need to keep scaling it up and hit our target.
And it's a slightly different thing just to end with you all on. Bold predictions is one thing, but really just the thing you'd want listeners to hang on to, really, walking away into their daily lives? Because, whether they work in the industry or not, I'd just love to know what you would want someone to just take away from a conversation like this.
I think, as I've said before, don't take cement and concrete for granted. Recognise that it is a valuable material that can play a part in a green future.
I think for me, it's to just drive home the commitment of these large multinational companies, which most of them are in the UK, to produce products that are low carbon. We're not sat there doing nothing. There's huge amounts of work going on, and they're all deeply committed to achieving net zero.
I'd say think differently and challenge us. We want to be challenged. That's how we progress, isn't it? We haven't got all the answers. So come ask us questions, challenge us, and let's kind of move forwards together.
I can see the three of you turning up on Dragon's Den. I've just got this visual image of you three selling cement to the dragons, of course. Well, that brings us to the end of the first episode of The Material Mix. So a huge thank you to my phenomenal panel of guests for sharing their insights and to everyone for listening. We'll be back.